As to the charge of first-degree murder, verdict as to count 1. We, the jury, find the defendant not guilty, so say we all, dated at Orlando, Orange County, Florida, on this 5th day of July, 2011, signed foreperson.
Those stunning words read in an Orlando courtroom, not guilty, the words that will free Casey Anthony, who has been sitting in jail for 3 long years, agonizing over the capital murder case that she was potentially looking at the death penalty, being accused of the murder, the premeditated murder of her own child. Dan, I mean, it's so shocking. I mean, it's like, it's a lot of people feel like this is like O.J. Simpson all over again.
It is, and you know, even if she wasn't convicted of murder, she wasn't proven beyond a reasonable doubt to be a murderer, but it was beyond any doubt that she lied to the police when her daughter was missing. She made up a false person who allegedly kidnapped her daughter. So this is someone who is not a good person, not a good mother, and she'll be out in a couple of days.
Well, she was convicted of those crimes, so we'll see what the judge does with it. But just because you're a liar and just because you party when you're not supposed to party, according to our feelings, doesn't make her a murderer. And I think that a whole issue of possible accidental drowning and then improper disposal of a dead body remains open as a possibility.
Right. Partying doesn't make you a murderer, but when your daughter's missing and your daughter is dead and you're partying and there's no other reasonable explanation for someone else killing your daughter, it seems to me that it's consistent with murder. Obviously, the jury did not believe that beyond a reasonable doubt.
It's consistent. The findings are consistent with asphyxia, but you have to have more than consistent.
Right. And clearly it didn't rise to the level of beyond a reasonable doubt for the jury here, but this is someone who did some pretty heinous actions and now will be free, and we'll see what she does with the rest of her life.
All right, what do you think, Deanna? I mean, do you think the prosecution kind of over-tried their case by specifying cause of death and really laying it all out there in the opening statement, where if you didn't even buy a part of that theory, if you didn't think, you thought, well, maybe she might have killed her daughter, she might have given her some chloroform, but I don't know if I believe that it was chloroform and then taping over her mouth. That just seems improbable. Dr. Bodden says we even have not one case ever in the history of the United States where a child has been killed in that fashion.
Well, you know, and it's interesting because you do have to wonder if the prosecution here just got wrapped up in the sheer dislike, and I'll use that term. I think, quite frankly, you could use much harsher terms based upon some of the general public towards this particular defendant, Casey Anthony, and did overreach. And you do see that in prosecutors' cases. And you know, but at the same time, you can Monday morning quarterback this thing all you want. The bottom line is that they chose the strategy they chose. This could have been a case that way back when might have been resolved through some sort of a plea offer, but for putting the count 1 on the table and making this defendant, Casey Anthony, face the death penalty. So they really did raise the stakes. At the same time, it's interesting because when you have, in order to impanel or choose a death penalty jury, they have to be willing to find the death penalty. And so one of the tactical reasons that prosecutors do that, I would argue, is to call out perhaps what they would consider jurors more likely to acquit a defendant in a murder case. So, you know, they got the jury that they really wanted. They got a death penalty jury, and then the death penalty jury turned around and threw it back to them and said, you know what, guys, we're death penalty, that's fine, we're cool with that, but you guys did not reach your burden beyond a reasonable doubt. It's that simple.
All right, and let's take a listen. I think we have a bit of sound from Jose Baez saying that he has indeed, said that he saved a life, and some of the other comments that he made. He said, I want to start off by saying that while we are happy for Casey, Kaylee has passed on far, far too soon. My driving force has been and is making sure there is justice for Casey and Kaylee, because Casey did not murder Kaylee, and it's that simple. And today our system of justice has not dishonored her by giving a false conviction. He continued to say, I want to thank everybody who stood behind me and the man who took me under his wing, which would be Cheney Mason, the veteran defense attorney in Orlando, Florida. He said, it really is, I do have mixed feelings for those facts. This case has brought on new challenges for all of us in the criminal justice system and in the media. And, you know, Dan Schorr, he continues to say, I think this case is a perfect example of why the death penalty does not work. murder is not right no matter who does it. He said it's disgusting, and I think if this case gets any attention, it's that we should stop killing our people.
Well, that's a whole different issue. I mean,
but he's politicizing it at
right,
this point,
and he's making it into a death penalty issue. He says that Casey Anthony didn't kill her daughter. I would ask him, well, then who did? Because I think it's clear that someone did. The idea that this was an accident and then the body was just thrown in a swamp for some unexplained reason just doesn't make sense.
Why, Dr. Bodden, didn't they perform that test to see if, in fact, she had drowned using the skeletal remains? They don't need tissue to perform that test.
Right. I don't know. The test we're talking about is the diatoms that every body of water has little planktons, the beginning of the food chain, and there are about 3,000 different types, so that each body of water has a fingerprint of 5 or 8 of these planktons in it, and when we drown, we inhale it and it goes into our lungs and then into our bone marrow, and they stay in the bone marrow, and at autopsy one can find these plankton, these one-cell creatures, and compare it to what's in the water. So you have to compare to see if it's the same.
Would you still be able to do that after the fact? I mean, you know, there was a large period of time that elapsed between the disappearance, the discovery
it makes it
of the
harder.
body.
If the pool is still the same, hadn't been emptied out,
right, drained,
and drained. It happens in June. The same diatoms would be there till the pool is drained out. I don't know, do they drain pools in Florida? And also, what's put into pools often is something called diatomaceous earth is put into pools. Diatomaceous earth consists of these diatoms. And depending on which ones are there is a fingerprint of that water, and that has to be compared to the what's in the bone marrow. They took bone marrow and they sent it for toxicology, which didn't find any chloroform. I mean, all the regular tests did not find any chloroform in a higher amount, but they didn't test it for diatoms. It's a difficult test to do because it has to be sent to a special laboratory.
Sure, but they did do it. The prosecution did do a test about chloroform odors in the trunk.
Yeah, but yes, but
so why not
I
do
will
this
tell
other
you,
test?
having been around quite a while smelling dead bodies, there's no unique
right, but I'm saying if they did that test, which isn't even
decomposition.
readily accepted, if you want to seek truth and justice, why not do this
You're
test?
absolutely right. They do a test that's a novel test, never been done before, it has not been corroborated, but they don't do one that's been around for 100 years to do. And I think the same thing is with the car. They did all this stuff about the car. The simplest test would have been to take some of those maggots and flies and do DNA on them. If the flies had eaten up on the remains, the DNA of the remains is in the fly and in the maggot and in the pupa cases, and that solves it one way or the other immediately.
Meaning what?
Meaning that if they have the child's DNA in the flies, then the flies, there was a body in that trunk that the flies ate on.
And what's the best part for the prosecution to say, yes, in fact, there was a body in the trunk?
It's the sniffer thing of Dr. Arpad Vaz.
Just the chloroform.
And, no, he also did the...
right, but the point is, in order for them, their whole theory was that it was chloroform that was used as a contributing factor in the cause of death, along with, you know, covering the child's nose and mouth. And my point is, even if the little girl drowned and it was an accident, right, she wasn't being properly supervised or something happened, and Casey goes and tries to hide the body and puts it in the trunk, how is that helping the prosecutor? I mean...
That's right. That is, if she put a dead body, accidental dead body in the trunk, it would have the same chemicals in it and the same sniffing and the same
But they need her in the
flies.
trunk because of the chloroform that they're alleging was in the trunk. That's the whole point. Because otherwise, you could have an accident, that terrible accident would happen, that you could panic and put a body in the trunk.
You're absolutely right. It's finding the chloroform.
To figure out what you would do with it. I mean, it's reprehensible.
I guess the response would be that if there's an accidental death, why would you put the body anywhere?
Well, that's what the prosecution is saying. Why wouldn't you call 911? Because that's what they said. Parents, caregivers do 100% of the time is you try and what? Save the child.
You know what happens? We as medical examiners find bodies that have been dumped. Often, the most common in New York City is a drug addict dies and the friends don't want to deal with the police and they dump him in the nearest park or woods or water. and they make what's an overdose, accidental overdose, look like a homicide. And they often put duct tape around them and make them into smaller packages. It's unusual to do a baby like that, but it happens. There have been cases like that where drug addicts have had babies that died. They think of whatever, sudden infant death syndrome or something. They don't want to deal with the police, and they throw the baby out in the garbage.
But here you have the grandparents clearly love this granddaughter. If Casey Anthony loved her daughter, she also wouldn't want to hide the body.
Yeah, no, that all makes it so upsetting and
it
so emotional.
It also just brings up the point that if Casey Anthony knew about this, and according to the defense's own admissions, it was an accident, and at some point she knew this, if she had come forward sooner, then they could have conducted these tests. And because they would have known that drowning was a potential cause, and perhaps saved everybody a lot of time and money. So I think some of that responsibility can be placed at the feet of Casey Anthony for being untruthful with the police.
Oh, you're absolutely right. But at the very beginning, the mom and the boyfriend had raised the possibility of drowning, and that is in July. And she denied it.
Off.
Yeah,
she
brushed it off.
Surprise, surprise.
But they could have taken a little glass of water or something and saved it or something for further tests. But you're right. The fact that there was such a long time in finding the baby made it much harder to do any tests on the baby.
All right, we were taking a look at the courtroom moments ago, where you see the chairs of the jurors, the seats, as we await their comments as to how they render these stunning verdicts: not guilty of the murder charges, not guilty of the manslaughter charges, not guilty of aggravated child abuse, coming back simply that Casey Anthony, they felt the only part of the prosecution case that was proved beyond a reasonable doubt was that Casey Anthony was a liar but not a murderer, returning guilty verdicts on 4 counts of providing false information to a law enforcement officer, each carrying a maximum of 1 year. I want to thank the panel for joining us today, and the viewers as well. Verdict again, not guilty. Casey Anthony cleared of killing her daughter, Kaylee Anthony. I want to thank everybody for watching the program today, and ask you to take a look as well at Fox News Channel. We'll be having continuing coverage throughout the day. And to join me this evening for Is It Legal, we will do an entire show on Bill O'Reilly tonight to discuss these stunning developments. Thank you, Dr. Michael Baden.
What a great inauguration.
Thank you, Dan, for joining us. Dan Conway, thank you so much for being here with us. Dan Schorr and Dr. Michael Baden.